I just finished the Pitt season 2. The finale was great. I love this show, but I want to talk about whether or not this series is effectively criticizing its white savior fantasies or if it's accidentally becoming one, specifically in how the writers are so inconsistent and maybe even conflicted about how to handle Robbie's behavior and his relationship to his staff. Obviously, the villain of the Pitt has always been the healthcare system, and the show critiques that incredibly well, but season 2 complicates it by centering Robbie as someone who's been victimized by this institution and has now become this walking toxic contradiction who perpetuates the culture of that system. And yes, Robbie's a great doctor, and they wrote him an incredible mental health arc this season, but he represents this older, boundaryless style of work, and even when the show calls out his martyrdom or his savior complex, he's still pushing people past their limits and mostly getting framed by the writers as this sad, complicated hero. The finale actually acknowledges this in a really strong way when Langdon calls Robbie out on his shit and tells him that his mental health and the way he projects onto the staff is just weighing down the ER. There are so many examples of Robbie being a crash out in the ER this season. Like in the ICE episode, he screams at them to get out, but it feels less about protecting this targeted patient and more about protecting the image of the ER, or that speech about women that he gives about being mistreated by paramedics. That felt more like performative feminism to validate him and his toxic behavior. Stay on that point about how Robbie's been treating women around him over these past 2 seasons. Samira, Javadi, McKay, Gloria, Al-Hashimi, Dana. Some writers are intentionally highlighting Robbie's gender double standards, his microaggressions, his attitude toward these women in both seasons, and then some writers seem more unaware of it. And the best example of the contradictory writing is Robbie's relationship to Samira this season, and specifically the Samira apology in the finale, which was in line with how the character speaks and her sensibilities, but it was not in line with her arc, and it felt really mishandled and just incredibly strange. Samira was written to spend the entire season getting crushed by the ER, the healthcare system via Orlando and his family, and then Robbie's toxic pressure that he normalized in the ER. And when she responds to that pressure as a human being, he berates her and then belittles her in front of her coworkers, which would have made a little bit more sense if they wrote Robbie to own up to his behavior, but they didn't. Instead, they gave him a baby and focused on his mental health arc instead. And what is likely our last time to see Samira on this show, she's written to apologize to Robbie, which doesn't make any sense, especially when you consider that Robbie himself criticized Langdon for doing something very similar to Santos in season 1. Samira's apology felt like a group of writers trying to force an emotional reset back onto Robbie's terms, and maybe that's because some writers, possibly Noah Wyle himself, want Robbie to be the moral center of the show, which is fine, but the inconsistent writing of Robbie is why I think The Pitt is at risk of becoming a white savior fantasy, because these writers are struggling to commit to what Robbie represents. I think season 3 is going to have to decide, is Robbie the heart and guiding voice of the ER, or is his martyrdom and behavior symbolic of what's broken? Because right now he's both, and this show that I love so much could get messier as a result.